we've seen the Kyogo show and it's been brilliant, and I don't think we're going to get any more of that yet. Kyogo's never going to hit the heights of Ange's Kyogo.
Is this not peak time to sell him? He's not exactly banging the goals in.
If you're going to sell him halfway through a season, you better do something special.
Oh my God, Kyogo's gone! Well, he's not gone, but he seems to be leaving. That's what we're mostly discussing in this week's episode of 20 Minute Tims. I'm joined by Melly.
Yes.
And Stephen.
Hello.
Can you give us a recap, Stephen, of what happened during the week? Why we're all in a bit of a tizzy about Kyogo potentially leaving?
It's been a massive week for Kyogo, hasn't it? You get played in the right wing, of all things, chipped in with a couple of goals, but prior to that he was linked very alarmingly with a move to Atlanta in MLS. Just after we'd all fallen back in, we'd healed the wounds of Brendan Rodgers falling out with the fans. We had a right good bloody laugh about it, singing songs about Lustig and Charlie Mulgrew and all that. Everyone was moving on, and then a bombshell hits and Kyogo's linked with a move away in January. So to recap what happened then, so there was a link a few weeks ago. Before any of this stuff happened, there was a link a few weeks ago when Ronnie Dyler was first linked with the Atlanta job. There was talk about how he was going to make a move for Kyogo as I think it's called designated player in the MLS, as one of their
silly American rules.
A fancy word for expensive player in MLS, right? So that link came and went a few weeks ago, but then during this week, Kyogo was announced by MLS as a signing for Atlanta, and then they later apologised for it, and it was all a little bit alarming. What is also piqued my interest is that Brendan Rodgers has been offered a number of opportunities to just say, look, he's not going anywhere. We've got Champions League games coming up. We've got massive games. We're not about to sell our best striker, the best striker in the country. He hasn't really done that. He's just been a wee bit kind of coy about it and saying, he'll be on the bus to Ross County. And I'm like, say something better, Brendan, please. Don't sell him. We know you watch. We've figured out your username, Anton Rogan 88. You nearly snuck it past us. We know you watch. Do not sell Kyogo. Come on.
Coming later in the podcast, we've got questions from the Discord. If you want involved in that and you want to support the podcast, and you want extra podcast videos, writing, reaction to every Celtic game, all that good stuff, patreon.com/20minutetims is where you can get most of that. If you get your Celtic content on Substack, we're also putting match reaction podcasts on there for every Celtic match. And if you're an Apple listener, match reaction podcasts, ad-free bonus podcasts, all on Apple. It is absolutely everywhere you can find us, but there's links in every bio. Martin Melly, Stephen is right to point out that Brendan Rodgers was asked about the Kyogo thing. Will he be here at the end of the window, or is he leaving? And Brendan Rodgers replied, as Stephen said, I can assure you he'll be on the bus to Dingwall,
Right.
which is as close to he's leaving as you're really going to get, isn't it?
The Dingwall bus was leaving less than 24 hours later, wasn't it? So, there's probably no smoke without fire here. There was the sort of teaser from Atlanta about a Japanese flag in one of their tweets as well, but they have since signed another Japanese player. So, did that say teaser number 1 or something?
Yeah,
Volume 1.0.
So, there could be something in it. There has been strong links over the last few weeks, and it seems to be getting stronger. I said last week, is it maybe time to move on from Kyogo? But now that it's...
Shut you up, didn't he? Made you look a right mug.
Now that it's starting to come to fruition, I'm like, I'm not quite ready for it yet. But I do feel in the next window or two, he probably will go. Is this the right one for him? Hopefully not, because we've seen at the weekend he still can do the damage.
In his pre-Dundee press conference today, Brendan said, Stephen, something might happen this afternoon which will trigger things. And
Right.
I thought, I remember you saying this. Was it the summer?
Because he said was there a few deals.
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah.
He'd given us one of those things before about, there's a few deals yet to be announced. We were all getting excited about it. The reason I bring that up, though, is because one of the deals we suspected Brendan was talking about in the summer, or whenever that was, it was definitely the summer actually, was MATHIAS KVISTGAARDEN.
Yeah.
That was one that we all expected Celtic to go over the line. Now, I was speaking to someone at the time. I don't tend to bring this up in podcasts because they used the phrase a gentleman's agreement that we would go back in for KVISTGAARDEN in the summer, in the January window rather, and just never know what that really means. You hear these sorts of things in football all the time. But to me, it is starting to look like Kyogo's going to go, but we're not going to announce that until we've got KVISTGAARDEN tied up. So 1 in, 1 out, and I think that might be the swap for Celtic. The problem is, Stephen, any striker coming in has got massive, figuratively or maybe literally, boots to fill with Kyogo, because he's been immense for us, and we got a reminder of how good he can be against Ross County. But that for us is a player that has scored at literally every level. For us, I think it's safe to say he's the best striker we've seen since Henrik Larsson at the club.
Yeah.
Iconic, Celtic superstar, scores every kind of goal, again, as we were reminded up in Dingwall. The guy's been absolutely brilliant for us, and I know Brendan Rodgers says, I don't need my strikers to score 40 goals a season. If you look at my teams, the goals are spread out. That's fine, and we get that. We get that from a footballing perspective, you need, you want to play a certain way, and you need everyone to weigh in with the goals. You can't just rely on, like Hearts did for the longest time, someone just scoring 40 goals for you and getting you through all sorts of tournaments. But from a fan's perspective, it's very, very exciting to have such a prolific goal scorer up front like Kyogo, and that's where we made so many fun memories. Just watch him score against Rangers in the Champions League. Remember the goal? Was it the League Cup final against Hibs? He was injured. He came on and scored that absolutely wonderful lob. All these sorts of things are just like highlight. He's the human highlight reel.
Yeah, immediately when you started kind of musing about Jamie mused about Kyogo goals, I immediately thought of that one at home to, was that Ferencváros, where Jota pinged him through the middle. He just took it first time out in his stride and stuck it away. There's so many highlights, and it's enormous. I mean, as you say, figurative boots to fill. He's not the most imposing physically, but I don't envy anyone coming in to potentially replace Kyogo. And I know people will be watching this and thinking, or listening to this and thinking, hold on a minute, he's not gone just yet. We're just talking about the kind of news of the day, the news of the week, and there has been a lot, as Melly put it, a lot of smoke for there to be no fire at all.
We're 2 weeks into the January transfer window. We don't record another flagship podcast for another week.
Yeah.
Quite often we've been what we used to call, we've been TMT'd, and that's when we record a flagship podcast on the Monday, and then breaking news happens the very next day, most famously Brendan Rodgers leaving.
Yes,
we're sort of preemptively suspect that Kyogo may go in between flagship recordings.
We need to hedge our bets. We need to sell everybody on the podcast, and then when they don't go, we'll be like, well,
we'll just release this segment next week.
Yeah, exactly. But there's absolutely there's no getting away from it. Kyogo's a massive figure. He goes so far beyond just treating him as a business asset to be treated like someone you get the most value for. I mean, I get that it has to be balanced with that as well. You have to have a look at a guy who turns 30, I think, next week, but he is 29 until he's 30. That's how it works.
Sorry. What? Just run that one more time.
He's 29.
Okay. So today,
yes, today he's 29 until he's 30, but he's closer to 30 than he is 29. So,
okay.
So £1.75 is not a pound.
No. Right.
Honestly, see if you don't get this reference. one of the best things that's ever been on the internet. Quite handily. I tried to remind myself of it, and as soon as you start typing Arsenal fan, that's one of the first things that comes up. One of the best, most tedious arguments that's ever been on the internet. But anyway, he turns 30 next week, so I do appreciate the need for Celtic to be at least aware of the fact that he is, once he gets over 30, to be a diminishing asset in terms of just the cold hard business side of things. But as I said, Kyogo goes far beyond that. He is in my opinion, and I'm sure many others, a modern Celtic icon. You think of all the highlights we've already discussed, and the thought of losing him just now is, I don't know, it transcends all of this stuff about how you just sell him and move him on, because that's easier said than done as well. Even if you're in the market for 7-8 million, as Celtic, to their credit, seem to be these days, that seems to be the kind of going rate that they're paying out for players such as Trusty, Ida, and above, obviously, Engels. We're paying decent money for players. Even at that, going out and getting yourself a striker that can deal or can deliver what Kyogo can is not necessarily the easiest thing in the world to do. So I'm wary of just forgetting about Kyogo, just getting too accustomed to him and mentally moving on from him, because we got a timely reminder of it against Ross County there, where he popped up in an unfamiliar position. And see, when you're talking about the best striker since Larsson, people will have widely varying arguments and opinions on that, which everyone's entitled to, but with those goals, that takes him to 85, so that takes him beyond Chris Sutton. It takes him 2 behind Edward, I think, well off the likes of Griffiths, but Griffiths played an awful lot more than him. I think goals for games, or goals per game, I think Kyogo is ahead of Griffiths. That's ahead of Gary Hooper, who admittedly played an awful lot less, so he is right in there in the conversation, and in my opinion, at the very top of that conversation for the best since Larsson. and he's not going to be easy to replace if that's what happens.
It's a big ask, Melly, from Celtic, isn't it? Because how do you sell a player like Kyogo and say, yeah, we're doing this to improve the team?
That's a difficult Celtic are going to face here, but we've seen it a lot over the years, haven't we? Where you go all the way back, we've been replacing strikers quite well very recently. Kyogo replaced Edward sort of replaced Dembele. Celtic have had a steady stream of decent strikers, and even some of the backups were good players as well. And if Celtic are willing now to go out and pay that extra money instead of trying to find those bargain basement 1.5, 2 million players all the time.
Please no. No return to those days, please.
And even then, 4 million was quite a lot for Kyogo at the time, and you probably won't get that bounce that he got when Kyogo signed, because we woke up one morning and we'd signed this Japanese superstar. There was nothing to it. It was in there, but he's going to be difficult to replace. But that's the way Celtic have to be running now. If we are going to be in this player trade model, we need to expect, here we're signing good players, we are showing our goals, promoting them. We can't be shocked when a team comes in for these guys. And Kyogo's a bit different because he's not at that age where massive teams are maybe looking at him for the next step. He's probably looking for the next step that's best for him in his career, rather than looking to go to the biggest league right now, because he is nearly 30, Stephen.
Yep.
So
still 29 though, just to confirm that.
Just right now. So we're looking at him. Either he's not getting goals right now, but I think his all-round play has been fairly decent. So when you look at Kyogo, got the goals at the weekend, but that's because he was playing out wide. It wasn't because he was playing through the middle. So Celtic are in a wee bit of a funk with their strikers now. They're not.
There's a wee
scoring.
rejig needed in the front, isn't there? Because potentially we could be bringing in, or we need to bring in a winger, maybe two wingers, one on either side, and a striker. So your whole front three could kind of change in the January transfer window. Yeah,
it could. It's exciting, but at the same time a bit daunting, isn't it? Because you've got, as Mr. Crocker says, a guarantee of goals with Kyogo. He's just that guy that seems to get the goals. And like you say, Jamie, when you think back to certain players, you can always maybe look at players like Lee Griffiths. If people say he's the best since Larsson, he didn't do it in the Champions League, or he didn't do this, he didn't do that. Kyogo's done it all.
Oh, he scored some absolute wonder goals. I'm just reminding them all in my head, like that wee drop shoulder against Rangers. Remember he scored, put it past Butland. There's been
left foot effort from at home. The one at Ibrox where he just took it on the kind of bounce and smashed it into the bottom corner. It's weird that you said that Kyogo they got those goals because of let's face it, quite a radical tactical shift, using your main striker as a winger. But he was more involved in the play than he's been basically all season, had more touches than he typically gets up front. That's kind of natural because you're probably more involved in the play. But it's weird that stick Kyogo out in the wing and he gets 2 goals, stick Dyson through the middle and he scores a hat-trick early in the season. So the key takeaway is tactics are nonsense. Just make it up as you go along and play people in mad positions. I
just want to clarify something for the viewers and listeners. Kyogo's 29 today,
right? Okay,
as we record this. But on the 20th of January, which is 7 days from now, he turns 30.
Yep.
So if you're watching this or listening after the 20th, then Kyogo's 30 to you. Watch your listener, but to us he's still 29 at the time of recording.
Yeah, and at that point he'll be closer to 30 than he is to 31 for now.
Yeah, and we are firmly booted the arse right out of that. Do you think
that's the guarantee? Why do you think people tune in? Kicking the arse out of jokes is our thing.
We've been doing it for years. Do you think there is any business case to be made, Stephen? Do you see, the argument that someone might put forward? Look, we're going to get maybe £9-10 million for a guy who's 29 or 30. As loath as I am to bring it up. It's time to reinvest. We've kind of had our fun. He's Michael Jordan in it. He's quitting at the top of his game and going to MLS. He looks to me like the sort of player that would absolutely light that league up. And there's some good players over there. It's not the sort of retirement home that it used to be.
Your Lewis Morgans, your Johnny Russells.
Are they still?
I have no idea actually.
Lewis Morgan's definitely still over there. Well, old Thiago Holm is on his way to
some LA. Good players. The best player in the world, is he?
That's true.
Victor Wanyama?
Yeah. Is he still there as well?
I think he is. I think he's in Canada, yeah.
Well, gentlemen, please. Right, listen. Do you think there's any business sense at all to moving Kyogo? Can you be persuaded by this business argument?
Yeah, it's certainly part of the equation. As I said, that Celtic have to keep an eye on that kind of thing. But I think Kyogo is a special case in that I don't think the majority of the fans look at him as a guy, right, we're going to get mega money for him, so it'll be easy to part with. What we're dealing with is a reality where Kyogo is not worth the likes of your Jota, Matt O'Reilly, Kieran Tierney. He's not worth anywhere near that amount of money because of his age. And as you say, Mel, he's not going to go to Brighton or Southampton or Brentford or anyone that who would probably take a player like that and try and kind of flip him on. This is what you're looking at as a maximum of 9 or 10 million for Kyogo at this stage of his career, even though he's locked down for the foreseeable with his contract. So that's quite a hard sell for fans, to be honest.
I think it's a huge risk, honestly. I mean,
it's difficult to get excited about the prospect of 9 or 10 million. I know that comes in on top of the massive pot of money that's already there. So you would be looking. I know this isn't necessarily how it works, but I reckon if you're going to sell I'll say it again, I can't really think of a different way to say it. So a modern Celtic icon, if you're going to sell him halfway through a season, you better do something special.
Well, this is it. Like,
is this not peak time to sell him?
Right, but
he's not exactly banging the goals in. He did get 2 at the weekend, but as we said, he's playing out of position.
top goal scorer in the league.
But previous seasons, he was your talisman. He was the guy you relied upon. Whereas right now he's sort of, his power's diminishing, and I don't mean that, and he's getting worse as a player. But Celtic's not built for him anymore. It's not there for. He's not the focal point there.
That's Brendan Rodgers' whole point, isn't it? Brendan Rodgers' whole point is Celtic are a winning machine, and Kyogo, what I'm asking him to do is a key part of that. Yes, you're not seeing his numbers tick, 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 tick up every week, but we've lost one game, but we've hardly lost in a year. We're now progressing in the Champions League. We're doing better in tournaments. All of this is an accumulation of all the different things that's happening, one of which is Kyogo's now more involved in playing the space rather than just being the focal point for all those cutbacks and tap-ins.
Yeah, but he is involved, but I don't think he's very involved when it comes to Champions League away games at Ibrox. You put MD up there, and I don't think it makes much difference to the way Celtic play. Whereas where we look at the Atalanta game in the Champions League, Adam Ida was involved because he was an outlet for Celtic. Celtic could go from back to front and get out there. If Kyogo's there playing for Celtic, you have to play to a specific way. There's no real deviating away from that. Maybe it's just time for Celtic to move beyond that. And I love Kyogo. I think if he stays,
it sounds like you absolutely hate him.
Well,
Snake.
He didn't celebrate, so. But it just feels like it's the sort of right time to part the ways because he's not on fire. He's not like this time last season where we needed him. We had nobody else. The team's functioning well. Other players are coming in with the goals. It doesn't have to be the Kyogo show or Celtic have nothing. It might just be the right time. We always have a go at Celtic for holding on too long or not replacing players. Right now, if you brought in another striker who's a bit different, if they were to get 10 goals between now and the end of the season, I don't see Kyogo getting much more than that. So
I think Celtic have got a couple of problems, and it's had me quite torn on it because I think one, we've got from a base level sort of me just being a supporter watching the football with no intellectual knowledge of the game. That is exactly who I am, right. By the way. That's not me adopting a role. That's just me.
Is that what Brendan said?
Yes, that's what Brendan thinks about me. Celtic got an excitement problem. As far as we once had a team with Matt O'Reilly, Jota, Kyogo, and Pete Hatate. Matt O'Reilly's gone, Jota's gone, Kyogo's going to go, Hatate's not Pete Hatate. So from like a product, from an exciting point of view, there's no that stardust just doesn't sprinkle throughout the team really.
I think that's
anymore.
what I'm trying to get at when I say Kyogo kind of transcends all of that. And I think we're all sort of making the same point in different ways. I totally appreciate the business side of things, but me personally, what I'm trying to express is that I find it difficult to get excited about that. It's fine when it's like a younger player and you think we're going to be able to fund an entire half a team with the profits generated on this one player. That's not going to happen with Kyogo. All that's really going to happen is we're going to lose Kyogo and hope for the best. Fingers crossed that they're able to replace that in some way. You might be right, Melly. I think I'm maybe being a wee bit too misty-eyed about it because you made a good point about how you might be dealing with 10 goals for the rest of the season, whereas I'm pickling my brain with like, I bet he scored 35 that one season. That's
part of it. It's part of being a supporter. I think there's also the question of the greater good, if you want to call it that. If I was to have Brendan's back completely on this, I'd say, well, if Brendan has identified another striker that would create the team more in his image and help him achieve his goals more, and moving Kyogo on needs to be part of that. If part of Brendan's grand plan is something you've touched on, Melly, a couple of weeks ago, creating a team more in Brendan's image.
Yeah.
If part of what that is sadly, Kyogo has to move on because I've identified this other striker who offers the team different things in different ways, but I believe that this will push the team on and play better. Then I think I'd buy into that. You know, I wouldn't be beholden to keeping Kyogo for damn everything else. We need to keep this guy because, again, that's part of the quitting at the top with Kyogo. We've seen the very best of the guy.
And we don't want to get to the point where Kyogo's memories being sort of diminished again by he's just not as effective as he was. Maybe it's time that he goes out at the top where he's scoring for Celtic, he's won games for him, he's beat Rangers countless times, he's won all sorts of trophies, and as I always say, very rarely in football do you get to ride off into the sunset. Joe Hart got to do it, Ange Postecoglou sort of got to do it at the summer, where what more can these guys do here? Kyogo's at that point now, but what I was going to ask you two, I'll flip it on you. We always, the word's branded a lot. We've seen players come and go, but there's the certain factors to it. I think now he's had the longevity, definitely get the highlights reel. Where does he go in the Celtic's legends bracket? Because guys like Lubo Moravcik are legends at Celtic. He's here 3 seasons. Kyogo's done more than that. He's won more trophies. He's got more goals against Rangers. Legend.
Undoubtedly. Honestly, undoubtedly, Kyogo's one of the best Celtic players I've ever seen, and he's, for multiple reasons, he's one of my favourite ever Celtic players.
He's going to be, he's era defining, is what I would say. I would describe him as era defining, and that will only kind of come to full fruition years to come. Maybe 5-6 years from now, we'll be looking back on this amazing team that we had from the 2 Ange seasons into Brendan Rodgers, and we're looking at the sort of classics of that genre, of that era. Kyogo's absolutely in there. So yeah, I think he definitely deserves to be in the conversation for that. It's such a nebulous term where people say, no, this only qualifies you as a legend, that makes you a great and all that. It's kind of up to the individual, really, but I've no issue with him being in that conversation at all.
No, I will always have him up in the legends, the Rangers Champions League trophies, but is that maybe one of the things, another thing I'm kind of thinking about? It does define this era, but it's often defined as the Ange era, and I just feel like you were saying, Jamie, Ange, you had Jota, you had sort of Matt O'Reilly, Hatate, Kyogo, you had the Japanese influx and all these flair players, but now we're sort of seeing Kuhn coming to fruition, we're seeing Engels coming in, we're starting to see Trusty and Carter Vickers, a good partnership back there. Alistair Johnson's come on leaps and bounds. Is it time for this new Celtic sort of...
There is part of me that does think that. There's part of me that thinks that Brendan Rodgers has been playing in the sandbox with like the last generation of Celtic player, and I think I'd be quite keen to see Brendan Rodgers invest more. Now, look, part of that might be Brendan Rodgers. You know, he probably could have brought in 2 other players instead of going out and getting one Arne Engels at the level he's wanting to spend. The level Brendan seems to want to spend, things are going to move a bit slower. I think that's just a given. Can he flood a team with 4 Arne Engels in one window? I just think that's unheard of. So there is part
so funny if he sells Kyogo for 10 million and signs Balotelli again. That's the replacement. Imagine it.
I'd be quite keen to see what the next generation of Celtic team looks like. Look, and I don't think Kyogo's... I think it's important to mention, I don't think Kyogo's leaving us as like a busted flush. Like
no.
He's got many great footballing. I think he will honestly tear that league up. Kyogo's, to me, such an intelligent striker that he strikes me as a sort of modern day Pipo Inzaghi. You know how Inzaghi, when he just started to, he was always a poacher, but there was a time towards the end of his career where he just did literally less and less. Like he would just crop up in the box
offside,
and just like boop, pop it in the back of the net. You're like, well, how does this guy do it? Like, and I think that's the way Kyogo's career is going to go, especially if he continues in the MLS. So I don't think it's a case of I get rid of him, he's absolutely clapped out and he's done. But I just mean, I personally, we've seen the Kyogo show and it's been brilliant, and I don't think we're going to get any more of that yet. Kyogo's never going to hit the heights of Ange's Kyogo. No. So I'm quite happy to say, okay, let's give Brendan a run, see what else, see if he can pull another rabbit out the hat, another good transfer, and change the way the team are playing and bring on something even better.
Yeah, and the way the market's working now, there's more players available these days. The way English clubs are running, that they're having to sell constantly just to regenerate money so they can sell buy players themselves. And with Kyogo as well, you can see from him that when he's playing, Celtic don't have the players to do it because that's just the level they're at. But the amount of runs he makes that are not spotted, and I'm not saying he's going to be players in the USA and MLS are going to find these runs, but there's going to be so much space in behind, and he's sitting against low blocks every week trying to muster some space for himself, trying to make all these runs. If he goes in a league where the teams are more sort of evenly spread out, he's going to have more space in behind. I feel like you see a lot of goals from the MLS where guys get in behind a lot of time. You don't see it a lot in Scotland, just the way teams set up.
I've been so swayed though recently because of the type of goal Kyogo's been scoring. So for example, the ball from Engels we've spoken about a lot, not just because it happened in a very recent game, that deep ball just in behind the defence, and Kyogo just gobbles it up like he's always going to do with those chances. Alistair Johnston did it again the other day, and I'm just thinking, do more of that. Do that 50 times a season, we'll be laughing.
I thought you were going to say 50 times a game.
So we are deep in the transfer window, and Kyogo's pretty much the only outgoing player, but Celtic have been linked with a lot of ingoing players. Incoming players.
Disrespectful to Stephen Welsh.
Oh, of course, yes. Yeah. Stephen Welsh finally got that move to FC Mechelen.
Yes.
Is that how you pronounce it? They've been chasing that guy for ages.
Yeah.
It seemed like about the last 4 windows.
Do they still think he's 20 or something like that?
Let's not get into that. We went to the Discord, which is a benefit, and it's the best Celtic community online, a benefit of our Patreon, patreon.com/20minutetims. We asked them to send us some questions. We're sort of at the midpoint of the season, January transfer window. We thought we'd...
It's been a weird window as well, isn't it? A weird time of the season because...
It's zipped right past.
Like traditionally at this time, we would be purely focused on transfers and giving the board probably a really hard time about it, get the quality in and all that. And now, because there's so many games, we've barely thought about it and we find ourselves halfway through January and nothing's really happening. It's been a weird time.
So many games. So I got a question here from Dan from the Discord. He said, if current links work out and we sign KT on a pre-contract with a lump of change to get him up the road, and Urjaseter, Urjaseter, the Norwegian winger in brackets for 7 million. Would that be a successful January transfer window for you guys? If not, where else do you think we could reasonably strengthen? Martin Melly, KT rumours, I just don't see that being a difficult deal to do. It's been kicking about for ages that KT wanted to come here. The original rumour was that we were going to loan our left back until January, bring KT in at that point. Then it went quiet, and it looks as if we're now trying to get KT on a pre-contract. I just don't see that deal being difficult to do. That being said, however, he did come on for Arsenal the other day, so he did play some minutes. But so we get KT in, we get a winger in, circa 7 million. Does that represent a good January transfer window for you? Bear in mind, Kyogo's on the way out, so we have to factor that one in as well.
If we were... Yeah, that's the 2 positions I wanted to address. That was pre-losing any sort of first-team players. Yeah. Kieran Tierney, he came on for Arsenal. They were in extra time with loads of injuries. He was the 6th sub that day. So I think
Does that mean he's cup-tied and can't play for Celtic now?
Yes.
Well, and the old Arsenal are out the cup, which also goes in our favour because they'll have less games. So I think that should be an easy enough deal. He's probably about 5th choice left back there if everyone's involved, but they've got so many injuries now. I see these being done towards the end of the window. Just with the European games, teams aren't going to let players go when they've got 2 Champions League, Europa League games. So I think the last couple of days of the window are going to be very frantic for Celtic and most teams. Kieran Tierney would be brilliant for me, but watching the game at the weekend, I'm starting to think, right, if Kieran Tierney's going to be bombing down that left-back position, can we have Kyogo in that Scott Sinclair position and Adam Ida up front? But... I think Kuhn will come back in and then Dyson will be back. So I think we'll be okay in the wide areas if we get another winger in. So left back, definitely. If Kieran Tierney's the deal, we just have to try and get it done. I don't think Arsenal will be difficult to deal with. If he's got a pre-contract with us and it's more money off their wage budget if they can get him away early. The winger, don't know too much about him yet, but it seems like 7 million for an 18-year-old, we probably think that's quite steep, but that's the going rate these days.
Yeah, honestly, I just
especially for talent. And when, like the man you've already mentioned, you mentioned it sort of around the time he wasn't playing, that are Celtic fishing in these markets where there are good players, but we are just down the levels. Like Odin, Thiago Holm. Why am I calling him Thiago? Odin Holm. Just never worked.
You haven't earned that. Stolen valour.
Never worked out for Celtic. He's away today. He's not been in a squad for a long time, and this is probably the price you're having to pay for talent these days. Engels sit 11 million. This winger 7 million. That's the sort of going rate.
Let's just say, look, before we drink the you have to pay 11, 7, 8, 10, 12 million pound for a footballer talent Kool-Aid, right? Before we guzzle that all down, we've just spent the first half an hour of this podcast talking about how amazing Kyogo was for 4.5 million, and he only signed a couple of years ago. The best player on the team right now is Nicholas Kuhn, who we signed for about 4 million. One of the next best players, although albeit he's not been great recently, is Ali Johnson, who was less than 4 million. So you can get talent out there for much less than that. I don't necessarily think that automatically just because you're spending 7 million on him guarantees talent. I mean, we had 25 odd million quid of talent on the bench against Rangers, and we lost that game. So I just want to represent the other point of view, but I agree that you tend to get better players when you spend more money, but there still are good quality players out there for a lot less than 8, 9, 10, 11 million quid. I think you just have to be good at finding them, which was Celtic's problem.
That is the problem. And like the Kyogo one, but that was Ange. It was all Ange, wasn't it? Alistair Johnston's a sort of one-off. He came from the MLS, so the guys are out there that say all about the scouting, due diligence, doing all that. But Celtic they've got to marry that with moving players on at the right time, and we seem to have done that. But the key is to move players on, invest in a lot of squad. You're not going to get a direct replacement for Pete Kyogo, are you? And then do that. What we need to do is improve the rest of the squad. And if you were going to get rid of a couple of the fringe players and bring in Kieran Tierney and a winger, that represents a very, very good, because some of the deadwood we have to get that out, and then the squad's getting to that point where Brendan Rodgers is always talking about that sort of thinner squad but higher in quality.
Stephen, just to look back a wee bit to Dan's point, with the left back coming in and one winger, is that good enough for you in January? If not, what else do you want to see?
January now has become about how you would like to frame it, because what is the goal that we want to achieve with a January window? Because there is such little jeopardy in the league now that you could effectively say forget about it, but that it now becomes about preparing for next season. It goes back to the kind of, maybe some of the cliches we've had in previous years, where you're trying to sign quality in January so that you can bed them in time for the next season, and then keeps on going, keep evolving. So it's probably about that now, rather than anything that's urgently needing strengthening just now. And why I say that is not out of arrogance, it's because that we can't register new players for the Champions League anyway for the last 2 games of that. So it really is about how, obviously hope to progress in that, and then get new players involved. But it's not usually, you only have to go back as far as, or as close to this as 1 year where we were screaming for quality the entire month. This year, it doesn't really feel like that. It doesn't feel particularly urgent. A good winger and a left back, be that Kieran Tierney, I think would be a pretty strong window, really.
I think for January, that's really all you need, doesn't it? Tweaks here and there.
I think so. I think it goes back to that old chestnut as well, but 1 or 2 bits of quality to keep progressing. That's really what we need here. You make a good point about the not having to spend a lot, because I'm probably guilty of doing that as well, where if someone says, these £1.5 million signings, I'm thinking Bangura, Amido Balde, and Holmes, another one, right? And people could easily say, no, Matt O'Reilly, Rio Hatate, because it doesn't suit my argument. Let me list these duds as to why I don't want to spend that amount of money.
I do see a lot of that. I do see a lot of that sort of. I suppose you could call it Brendanomics. Since Brendan's arrived, it's like, well, we need to spend this money because that's where the quality is. But people might point to Nicholas Kuhn and go, well, wait a minute, this is the guy from the old model that we said didn't work and we had to trash it, and he's the best player on the team.
So, right, targets identified. I'm just so glad we get through that without mentioning Greg Taylor this week yet again.
So, next question is from Sean. Who do you think will be the first team left back at the end of the window? Will it be the same for the start of the new season? At the end of the window, first team left back for me is going to be Greg Taylor. Martin Melly.
It'll be Kieran Tierney for me. I think he's going to sign.
It's gone very quiet though, hasn't it? And we are on the 13th or whatever now.
I still kind of feel Greg Taylor might stay now. I don't know why. Pretty disrespectful of Brendan Rodgers not to start Greg Taylor and then to bring on Liam Scales at left back instead of bringing him off the bench.
Listen, we've moved on. We're all friends again now. We're all friends again.
But I have a sneaking suspicion that maybe Greg Taylor might sign now. I think if Celtic offered him a deal, he would take it. And him and Kieran Tierney is the sort of best of both worlds for me. You've got a guy, Kieran Tierney, who I love. I think he could, again, be a great player for Celtic. But we know with how he is, we need somebody who can play as many games as him, and Greg Taylor sort of represents that. He's been the best since Tierney, and now we're replacing Tierney with Tierney, and to have Greg Taylor there would be ideal for me.
Stephen?
Yeah, I'm less confident now about the Kieran Tierney thing just because it seems to have dragged on, and I thought that it's surely not going to be that difficult to do, just to get a player who's completely unfancied and out in the wilderness and has been for a long time.
We've already saved 2 weeks' wages
No,
here. Come
true,
on.
Well, do you know what? There's probably an element of that. Honestly, I just think, I don't even think, I don't know. I've got no inside information whatsoever. I guess there is zero negotiation going on between Kieran Tierney and Celtic about wages.
Yeah.
I reckon we'll know exactly how much we're going to pay him. He'll know exactly how much is an offer. He's quite happy to take it. And everyone's perfectly relaxed about the whole situation. And it's, I'll reply, email came in last week. Did you get it? What about this? What about that? And you know how buying a house takes ages?
Yeah.
I think it's probably like that. It's just lawyers firing bits of paper back and forward. I really don't think there's any hardcore negotiation going on here. And then I think once KT signs that pre-contract agreement, then I think Celtic go to Arsenal and say, by the way, we've signed a pre-contract with him. If you're not planning on using him, any chance we can get him up the road. But even if Celtic don't want to do that, we've still got Valle there and we've still got Greg Taylor. We've got 2 left backs as it is.
Yeah, you're right. I think Celtic do hold a lot of the cards here, particularly if Kieran Tierney has his heart set on coming back to Celtic. I think that's probably the best for
Make
him.
him beg.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people would probably like to see that. But I think you're right. I've maybe been guilty of overthinking the negotiation here and thinking that are Arsenal going to want Celtic to pick up about 60 grand a week or something like that of Kieran Tierney's wages or something like that, but probably not, because they're not in a particularly strong bargaining. They don't hold many of the cards here at all. So maybe I was very confident about it. It's just the fact that it's dragged on in typical January window fashion that I've maybe started to kind of go cold on a bit. Not personally, but I just mean I've kind of forgotten about it, and then he popped up for Arsenal, and I thought,
I thought don't get injured.
And it would be so typical of Taylor to do that as well, because I think is that the first football he's played in like months.
Since the Euros.
It's not be far off it anyway.
He's come on a couple of times.
Is he right? So it's not far off it then. So he's played very little since the Euros, but I'd be all for it. I'd love for the starting left back to be Kieran Tierney at the end of the window.
You'd like to think that if we have got that pre-contract agreement, it would make sense for all parties to go, look, he's not playing football for you. We'd like to get him in, get him playing football before the summer, and then go into those Champions League qualifiers. And if Celtic are paying whatever they're paying to Kieran Tierney, they can maybe go to Arsenal. Look, we're paying him this. We'll cover this to the end of the season. And you'd like to think Arsenal would go, do you know what? It's better us getting that than getting absolutely nothing for him. Then I remember this last year. Was it James McCarthy? Team came in for him and offered to pay 10%, and Celtic said no.
I offered to take him on loan, and we went no.
No. How insulting. We will continue to pay 100% of our wages. Thank you very much, Mr.
I
Great
don't know
Team.
if he's still at the club or nobody. What a bizarre transfer that was. Gregsy asks, Brendan Rodgers 2.0 seems very different to when he was here last time. I feel he's trying too hard to come across all laid back good guy in the pressers, but also pushing his luck a bit with the fans in terms of various comments on Pyro and songs. The nonsense about the KT song had me cursing his Tom Ford shoes. Is he already wearing a bit thin, and people, or does it matter if he keeps wearing? I don't think, Melly, for me, Brendan Rodgers is wearing thin. He's I've said it before, and I'll say it again, I wish he was a bit more open. I wish he was, whether that's positive or negative, I'm not saying just say things we like to hear. I want to hear more, less media trained, more speak for the heart, tells what you actually think, Brendan. You know, see, it's quite good when you see that wee glint in his eye and the wee quip comes out, or the wee joke comes out, or he'll be less, just give us a wee bit more of yourself. That's he's maybe not that type of guy. I feel like he maybe was first time around, but that might just be the green tinted specs. But I'm no fed up with Brendan Rodgers. I still think we're in. I could be completely wrong. I've heard a rumour that there's a 3-year deal on his desk if he wants it. I don't know if he will or not, but I still feel we're still in the early stages of it. I feel like this is Brendan Rodgers like 2.0, as Griggsy said, but I think there's maybe a 2.1, a 2.3, a 2.5. You know, I think there's. I feel like we're not really in the full. He's not really been given the full keys to the kingdom type thing. Do you know what I'm trying to articulate?
I do, because if we circle back to the transfer window, the reason I'm saying this team needs more of a Brendan stamp on it is because Odin Holmes away today. Palma's likely out the door. The other guys we want out this window are probably Nawrocki. It's only
Oxford United were in for him,
Yeah,
which is an extraordinarily drop.
it's probably only going to end up with Bernardo being the only signing from that window left come the end of January, and it just feels like he came in, get given these players, and it kind of never felt like his. And now from January last year onwards, we sort of got into Brendan's team, and then we've been going from there. But I think it was just up to the game at Ibrox. It was box office, Brendan up to there, and it's just taken a dent there. I think he'll come back. I just want to see him. I think he came in and it was off the back of Ange, who was really personable, and Celtic fans took to him, and it was hard for Brendan to come in off the back of that, plus have that sort of in the background that he'd already left us in the middle of the night. So he sort of tried to work around that. Just go out and be full Brendan, man.
Stephen,
that's what I want to see. Box office Brendan, just peak Brendan. That's the one I love, man.
I like the box office Brendan, but I just want to hear more. Like I want to hear more talk about more tactics. He seems to think there's a bit of...
That was brilliant. His first stint around, wasn't it? Remember he came in and he was talking about shapes and all that, and we're like, this has never been done in Scottish football.
I want more of that, and I think Brendan thinks, and he's right, I think Brendan thinks, or maybe he's annoyed and sometimes he seems pissed off, that there's a bit of like tactical illiteracy about what's going on at football, and that the fans don't really have a full grasp of what he's trying to do, and neither do the press and all that. But people want to hear about that. When Brendan's talking about like doing this or want to change the shape, and I want to do, that's when I tune in at these press conferences. I'm like, this is your expertise, and you like to hear experts talk about what they're good at. So let's hear a bit of that. I know there's only so much you can say about tactics and all that sort of stuff, but a wee bit more personality, a wee bit more about the tactics, a wee bit more knowledge. Just remind people who you are a wee bit is I think what people want to see from maybe Brendan 2.3. We're singing the 10 in a row song again, Stephen.
Yeah.
Which is great. I'm all for it. Are we singing Brendan Rodgers here for 10 in a row, though? That version
I've
been
not
wheeled
detected any of that, but he got a good ovation after the game of the weekend there. I think I've noticed on the video, he kind of ushered all the players away, and then he turned back for a big ovation just to get his own, which I'm all for. But I take into account the how you want him to speak from the heart more, but trouble with that is the very recent example of that we had. He went absolutely off the reservoir and started talking about disrespecting Greg Taylor and all that. Right? So it was like
2 mentions for Greg so far.
Do you remember that old story from years ago about how like the reason everyone found out Tom Cruise was mental was because he fired one of his publicists, and this person was in charge of basically keeping everything under wraps. And 1 week later, he was jumping up and down on the sofa and Oprah and all this. It was like 20 years ago. I feel like that whenever Brendan Rodgers does reveal his true feelings, he just starts ranting a lot of nonsense.
But I think there's this. I learned, or I remember reading once, that there's in media training, right? There's this thing. It's called like ABCD. When you answer a question, and see, when I read it, it's how every footballer ever answers a question. It's like acknowledge something, divert, or switch the question. So basically, you acknowledge what the person asks you, then change to what you want to talk about. I'm going to have to find this. I'll tweet it out, right? Put it in the show notes. But it's like once you spot it, it's how every football person, manager and player ever answers a question. And I think there's a guy that sits down with Brendan Rodgers before the press conference, goes, right, you're going to be asked this, you're going to be asked that, don't say fuck all. Like, and that's that's maybe the way Brendan Rodgers was brought up in that school of try and say very little. But I just release the shackles a wee bit. Well, no one's out to get you. No one's out to get Brendan Rodgers. We're not waiting for him to slip up so we can hammer the guy. It's no that sort of thing at all.
As far as being sick of him or getting a bit stale so far, I think maybe he probably thought along those lines, judging by the reaction to that game where all that stuff came out about Greg Taylor and Kieran Tierney and the back passing and all that. There was a lot of... The stadium was a bit quiet and there was a few grumbles. The thing is, I said at the time, I didn't hear really anything. I can only imagine, and I can't speak for the whole stadium, I can only imagine there's someone right over his shoulder is giving it constantly, and he's just snapped. But I suppose that I mean, understandably so. He's only at his work.
I know. But, so I'm trying to build you a winning football team here.
I think he would maybe take that reaction, be a bit annoyed about it, and I think you put it at the time, I've not put a foot wrong for 12 months here, and I'm getting this stuff. But I think, again, that was heavily influenced by the previous result. And it was at Ibrox, and everybody was a bit pissed off about it. Everybody was in a mood. So I don't think we can take the little bit of rancor between the fans and the manager and the players and all that blew up out of that daft press conference at the time. I don't think we can take that as an overall temperature of the Celtic fans versus the manager. I think it really was just a perfect storm of it being freezing and we were all pissed off about a terrible result 3 days before, and we've all moved on from it now, hopefully. So
we're better off points wise. We're more points ahead now than we were.
I meant to say that. We were sitting here in these very chairs just last week, absolutely fuming about the worst performance we've seen in years, and now a week on, we're even further ahead than before that game. Unbelievable. And
all because Brendan doesn't lose football games, apart from that one.
Staging walkouts and everything. It's been superb stuff in the last week.
2 more questions to go. Next one's from Martin, not you, Melly. He said, seems like teams have figured out an effective strategy to stifle our midfield. Stephen, how does Brendan address this? So far it seems like he won't change how we will go into a game.
Yeah, well, I think that's evident, and I think that point came up after the sadly I have to talk about it again, the Ibrox fiasco that we saw a few weeks ago. I think that I said at the time, look, it's not permanent. It's not like this is now, or that's it, Clement's a better manager, so that's it. It's all done. We may as well wrap it all up and go home. Now, it's just the case of, this is literally the nature of football managing. Sometimes you learn something you can put into practice, and sometimes you get an upper hand, sometimes you get an advantage. The other person learns something. This is what it's all about. So temporarily, it just seemed like teams had gotten a hold of Celtic, and it's not just about that game. There was patterns maybe quite strong, but there was evidence starting to pile up, and it was games that we were struggling to score goals away from home. I think there was a little run of 4 games away from home. We only scored 1 goal, and that included like Zagreb and Ibrox and all that. So it did seem like it was becoming a thing that teams had worked out how to frustrate Celtic. How to go about it better? I mean, that's way above my pay grade. It's just that I have noticed that has happened. I managed to do it at the weekend there by playing Kyogo in the wing, and as I said earlier, just make it up as you go along. Play people in mad positions. Exactly. Play people in mad positions, and all of a sudden you get great success from it. So I do take the point of the question, and I think it is one of those, whatever word you want to use about it, people get sensitive about using the words like slump or whatever dips in form, but I think that happened, and it's up to Brendan Rodgers to manage his way out of it.
But it's part of this, the answer maybe what we brushed upon in the Kyogo discussion, where that striker dropping deep, playing the space, offering an option, looping back around. Kyogo does that. Maybe Brendan Rodgers identified a player who's better at that. So when that changes kind of how the midfield operates a wee bit.
Yeah, and I think Celtic
maybe
function a wee bit better sometimes. Like, he's not scoring goals right now with Adam Eade up there because he's able to drop off. Some of his link-up play at the weekend was good. As soon as he got in the box, it wasn't so good. But there's different ways around it. For me, that sort of those run of results where Celtic weren't doing too well coincided with Arne Engels not being at his best, and I think
Hatate was a bit off form as well.
And I don't think Hatate's quite over that yet, but I do think Engels is. And when you look at Engels now, I think he's going to, hopefully, he's had that wee dip now. He might have another one, but just go from strength to strength.
Dictating now.
Yeah,
that's good.
The setup for the second Kyogo goal is exactly where I want to see him. That turning in that sort of inside channel and then getting those balls in. The one you spoke about, Stephen, where he does it from the other side, crosses in. That's where he's at his most dangerous. So I think it's down to him to now, like you said, Jamie, you kind of want to see him take a game by the scruff of the neck, and the sort of young boys games right there for him coming up.
You're talking about Arne Engels here?
Yeah, Arne Engels. I think he's the key in there, because we know what Cal McGregor can do, but we need somebody else in there to sort of step up, and I think Engels is getting better week on week. You could probably make an argument he could be man of the match in the last 4 or 5 games coming into this, so hopefully he can get through the Kilmarnock game and Dundee game tomorrow, and then it's full steam ahead to young boys, where you'll want that game for him to just sit up and everyone to sit up and notice and say there. But I do think there's a spot in the other side where somebody can.
So you think it's a personnel to answer the question? Sort of, you think that the solution to this is personnel rather than completely changing the way Celtic play?
And McCowan seems to have it for the last couple of games as well.
Yeah, I do, because I don't see Celtic making massive changes to their midfield that they think, oh no, this isn't working at all. I think it's a case of players not hiding, but have to get themselves involved more. If somebody's marking you, pull him away and create space for somebody else. And I don't think there was enough movement in the Rangers game. But also, players did get on the ball. Hatate and Bernardo did get on the ball, they were just brushed off it. So we need to find guys in there who are willing to be stronger on the ball. And I think Engels is that other position's up for grabs, and we'll see which one of the three guys grabs it.
Stephen, final question is from Ian in the Discord with the title all but sewn up. What are the realistic goals for the team in the second half of the season? Cup win, hopefully a good showing in the remainder of the European games. How should we be targeting our highest, or should we be targeting our highest ever goals total? Ian asks.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting because from a fan perspective, you're like, well, the league's sewn up, but from the football club and all the other competitions, there's loads to play for. There's so much. I mean, there's the treble, which for me is sort of taking on something else. It used to be like a once in a lifetime thing now, but now it's like, it's frequent, but you still want to win it. It's so important. It's not like you get bored winning
it's
trebles.
It's no routine enough.
It's no routine. There's just something special about winning every single tournament. Everything there is, that clean sweep, and that's almost become. The focus has changed a wee bit, I think, for the support away from the league to the treble. The treble's kind of become the new league, hasn't it? And you kind of want that. You want that clean. Oh wow! I said queen sweep. Don't want that.
No.
Then there's Europe. We've got young boys coming up. I think we've made that game nervy, but it'll be an exciting atmosphere, an exciting game for it. Then hopefully progressing. Then there's a couple of Rangers games. There's goals totals. I'm not too sure we will. Do you know the most ever goals, Melly? Do you know that off by heart?
Oh, I think it was Ange's season, 111 or something.
Yeah.
So there's lots of things to aim for the remainder of the season. There's lots of football and lots of excitement to go. But what do you think Celtic's primary aim should be?
Well, Brendan Rodgers has always been a quite goals-oriented manager. I think he's
very high performance.
Yeah, it's exactly what he is. But he's spoken about that quite openly. He talks about. He doesn't reveal them all the time, but he spoke quite a lot since he's been at Celtic, in both times, about setting clear goals at the start of the season and trying to tick them off. There's no doubt for me that going into this season, regardless of how it's turned out with the title race going for, or as it is now, basically over. Well, in fact, we called it weeks ago, didn't we? Before we get gubbed at Ibrox.
Done.
Aye, so I thought you were going to say something there. So what I think it's Ibrox more. So I think the treble is absolutely a goal of Brendan Rodgers this season, because I think he was pretty annoyed that they didn't win, or did really quite poorly in the League Cup last season, went out to Kilmarnock very early on. So I think that has stuck with him, and I think that's really annoyed him. In fact, I don't even need to guess that. He said that, didn't he? He said that's one we want to get back next season. So I think the treble is definitely a goal, and it's a realistic one, and it's enough of an achievement now. You're right. It's not been diminished over the years, but it has become a lot more frequent, but not to the point where it's just like some routine
I nearly
thing.
blew my top watching Adam Eder score that goal.
Exactly. So we haven't won a treble under Brendan Rodgers yet this time around. So I think that'll definitely be a goal. 100% is some sort of tangible European, whatever it is, right? Some sort of goal achieved in Europe, whether that's, I don't think, with the structure of it now, I don't think finishing in the top 24 can realistically be termed as like a massive achievement, but it is definitely an achievement.
Picking up the points and getting the wins to get there, for sure.
Definitely. And
I kind of disagree, because we've won one Champions League game in 10 years, and then to go into this one and win 3-4 maybe.
I think what we'll have to do though is that there are, for me, very distinctive before times and after times in the Champions League. I think it's very difficult to compare this campaign with others because of the extra 2 games. I think it might sound like very little, it's 2 extra games. I think it's massive though. I think it's a huge difference in how you can play. Because previously we would have been drawn against one massive team and get gubbed off them both times, and then you're kind of struggling from then on. There are much more opportunities to progress, and it's a league table. I just think I'm not trying to diminish Celtic's achievements in it or anything like that, but I think Opta worked out that we had statistically the easiest draw in the entire competition. I'm not doing that down. You play the cards you're dealt, right? But what I'm saying is that I don't think just scraping into number 24 on the table will be like Brendan Rodgers. Like, I've done it. What I mean is, we want to see going through, hopefully getting a favourable draw and actually turning up and making a good show of ourselves, not necessarily going through. I know there's this thing about the not winning a knockout tie for, what's that, 21 years now, that'll be, right? So I know there's that thing, but it depends on where we're finishing the table. Obviously, we'll be playing a team higher up, the lower down we finish, hopefully if we get through. So I think we just want to really show up and maybe, like we've done against Atalanta this season, just come away from that just generally proud of the team.
Yeah,
so
leave our mark in Europe.
That's exactly the term I'm kind of driving at without using it, because we've said that so much, and I'm trying to think of different ways to put it, but it really is making a mark in Europe. I think that's the overall goal of this season, aside from the treble, and I think it's doable, and I think it'll be very much in Brendan Rodgers' focus.
We're going for 55.
Oh,
that's what's left for the left for the league.
I'm all about the numbers, baby. 55.
Most successful team in the world.
120 trophies.
We're going for 55. That's what's left. No protests here. Listen, thank you.
I've killed it. I've killed the outro.
Bit killer Jones.
But see the amount of people who have, quite rightly so, made a big deal of like slagging Rangers off for now having their fake accolade that they made up. A lot of people are now putting like 119 into usernames. That's not going to last long at all. We're going to need to change that again in a few weeks.
Yeah, because we're different from them. This football team are built different. Listen, if you want this ad free, guess what? Patreon.com/20minutetims, Apple Podcasts and Substack. You can get the flagship ad free on there. Listen, thank you so much to everyone who watches and listens and subscribes. We really appreciate it. Thank you for your support last year. Bit of a weird thing to say on the 13th of January. We'll see you next week.
Happy New Year when it comes.